Hello everyone and welcome back to the Beatles Forever. Today we're delving more into Wings, and this time it's the making of their album Band on the Run. In the year 1973, the band Wings were beginning to have friction. Denny Seiwell was missing doing his studio work, and the business end of Wings hadn't been settled. Paul didn't really put things on paper, it was more of a handshake, and both Denny Seiwell and Henry McCulloch felt like Paul was listening to Denny Laine and his ideas and not theirs, according to the book Band on the Run by Gary McGee. McCulloch wasn't doing much to keep himself in the band because he would talk rudely to Linda in public, and he also threw up when they were doing a promo for the film My Love. Paul McCartney and Wings put out the single Live and Let Die before that, and it was very popular and sold more than 1 million copies in the United States. Paul decided it was time to get back to the studio and start the next album. Well, the new album was to be called Band on the Run, according to Songfacts. McCartney wrote this song in response to drug laws that criminalized him and his friends, including fellow bands on the run, Eagles, and the Byrds. "We're not criminals," he explained. "We would just rather do this than hit the booze, which has been a traditional way to do it. We felt that this was a better move." And George Harrison would have been flattered had he known that Paul remembered a line he said. During a lengthy meeting with executives at the Beatles' Apple Records, George Harrison complained, "If I ever get out of this house." McCartney remembered the line and used it years later in this song. Paul decides to record the album outside of London. Paul thought that going somewhere different might be inspiring and give them a different sound. He got a list of studios outside of EMI, and he zoomed in on Lagos, Nigeria. He wanted to get the African rhythms and also to be on the beach during the day and the studio at night. Well, there was trouble before the trip even started. Paul wanted to rehearse before they left, and that's when things came to a head. Paul decided he wanted to dictate the way Henry was playing the guitar part, and Henry said it wasn't possible to play it that way. And Paul said, "Okay, give me the guitar and I'll show you." And Henry got mad, just like George Harrison had done at one point, and got up and left, saying he was leaving the band. He felt like he wasn't being listened to, and his creative ideas were never listened to either. And later he would tell Melody Maker magazine, "I wouldn't have Linda in a band. She doesn't have a musical head on her." Denny Seiwell tried to get Paul to hire another guitarist before they left, but Paul had other ideas. He wanted to record their parts and then do overdubs like he'd done on the album Ram. But Denny Seiwell wanted a true sound. So the night before the trip to Africa, Seiwell called and said he didn't want to go, so that meant he was no longer in the band. Well, at this point, Paul and Linda were afraid that Denny Laine might back out too, but he showed up at the airport, and he was loyal and stayed with them till Wings disbanded. Well, Nigeria wasn't what it seemed to be. Nigeria is a Commonwealth, British Commonwealth, but it had been overtaken by a coup, and it was being run by a military government. It was also a poor country, and it was taken over by angry people who lived there. Paul thought of sunshine and lounging on the beach, but this was a monsoon season, so there was mud everywhere and heat, humid heat. The bugs didn't like the heat either, and they would escape into the buildings. And as that wasn't bad enough, the studio that they were supposed to record in was under construction, so everything that could go wrong was going wrong. Well, Paul got a membership to a country club where he could swim during the day, and they would start the sessions late in the afternoon. And the sessions lasted sometimes till midnight, but some lasted till 5 in the morning. And then the weekends they went sightseeing, and they didn't record. Terror on the road. One evening, Paul and Linda were walking down the road, and there was an old car following them. And Paul thought he'd been recognized, but they weren't fans, they were robbers. The robbers jumped out of the car and surrounded them with knives. They wanted their money, their watches, and their cameras. Linda pleaded with them, saying, "Don't kill us. We're musicians. He's Beatle Paul." One man laughed, and another grabbed their possessions, and also the demo tapes from the sessions. And they jumped back in the car and left and were never found. And Paul and Linda were upset, of course, and reported the incident to the local police. The police told Linda and Paul that they were lucky. An officer told them if Linda and Paul had been black, they would have killed you. But they know you won't identify them because to white folks, all us blacks look alike. Well, Paul had a health scare there too. One day while recording, Paul had trouble breathing. He had to gasp for air and went outside on the street. The doctor was called, and Paul found out he had a bronchial spasm because of the heavy smoking he was doing. He had to stay in bed for a few days before returning to the studio. A rift developed between Paul and a Nigerian musician. Paul, Linda, and Denny went to a nightclub where they saw a musician, Fela Ransom Coot, perform, and Paul liked the jungle beats he was doing. Paul thought that Fela and his group were the best band he had seen live, according to the book Man on the Run. But the evening didn't turn out too good when the musician accused Paul of exploiting Nigerian musicians and stealing their culture for his gain. Fela hadn't even heard of the songs when he made statements on a Lagos radio, and this guy didn't let up. He even went to the studio and accused Paul to his face. And Paul said, "Look, we've done all right without Africa so far. Nobody's going to swipe your music." And he played the musician some tracks to prove his point. Well, Paul called this period in his life frightening. The fall of 1973 was one of the most frightening periods that he had. He felt that at the time, Wings wasn't as successful as he thought it would be, and the band lost some members, and the critics didn't think Paul would be able to write songs like he used to. They completed the album in England, and it was funny that the only African connection was a guy they hired in London, a drummer named Remy Kabaka. He was from Lagos, but that wasn't known when Paul hired him. And most of the album was recorded in Africa, but there wasn't that much influence on the album. It is said that the Band on the Run album was to be their most British-flavored collection. Paul felt like the album was special. On the third day of mixing, he felt that way. And Paul came up with the album cover, and the album, as we know, features Paul, Linda, and Denny, and others who appear as prisoners escaping with the spotlight on them. Well-known celebrities included Christopher Lee and James Coburn, TV talk show host Michael Parkinson, singer Kenny Lynch, Parliament member Clement Freud, and boxer John Conte. It was spur of the moment that they had been invited to appear. And then Paul rewarded Denny Lane by giving him a percentage of royalties from Band on the Run, and this would give Denny royalty checks. He was able to move from a houseboat to a mansion. The money wasn't really what Paul had promised it would be, however, and they still had no contracts drawn up, and Denny would only get what Paul thought was appropriate. So Band on the Run was a great album for Paul McCartney and Wings, but it was an album that wasn't easily made due to unforeseen circumstances. The funny thing was that when Paul and Linda got home from Africa after 3 weeks there was a letter dated prior to his leaving that said, "Do not, under any circumstances, go to Lagos. Cancel. There's been an outbreak of cholera." But luckily they didn't have to deal with that. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, it would be greatly appreciated, and be sure to click on the bell to get notified when a new video has been made. Sorry for my voice. It's like the allergy season, springtime, and sometimes that affects me, so I apologize. And I hope everybody's been having a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of The Beatles Forever. Thank you. Bye.